Good morning. It's 9 a.m. and I will call the order of the it's the March 11th meeting of the Saline County Board of Commissioners. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Commissioner Shadwick.
Here.
Commissioner Grievous.
Here.
Commissioner Sparks.
Here.
Commissioner Weiss.
Here.
Commissioner Hay.
Here.
If you're able to please stand and join me on a flag salute, followed by a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. At this time, we will move into our citizens input portion of the meeting where members of the public may speak on county government, usually limited to 3 minutes and pertaining to items that will not be discussed on today's agenda. Are there any members of the public that would like to speak? Please state your name and address.
Rosemary Mai, Saline, Kansas. Good morning, Commissioners. I'd like to invite you and the citizens of Saline County to the Granny Brigade meeting, which is next week, Tuesday evening at 7 o'clock at the Carver Center. And our guest speaker will be Michael Austin, which is a Kansas economist, and he'll be speaking on taxes and budget. Thank you.
And that is 7 o'clock?
7 p.m., yes.
Yes,
Next
gotcha.
week, Tuesday evening at the Carver Center. And the public is invited.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Rosemary.
Norman Mount, Salina. Why is city and county law enforcement on the street at the same time? I know the city is in the county, but isn't this an overlap of services? The DOGE, we could be a little more efficient.
And it's one of those, that's one of those statements that it's,
Okay.
or questions that's hard to answer because it's like with us having the Kansas Highway Patrol Training Center here, you have those people on the street, you have the city police on the street, and you have the county sheriffs on the street getting out to the highways and everything else.
I understand that. Next one. When are we going to put the old jail up for sale to the highest bidder on the internet?
That's still under discussion. Yep,
Let's see, it's March what?
thank you. At this time, we'll move into our consent agenda, which consists of approval of tax roll adjustments, approval of accounts payable, approval of public forum agenda, approval of payroll, approval of county commission meeting minutes February 25th, and a talk group MOU with the Alcoholic Beverage Control Enforcement Agent. Are there any commission who wish to add or delete items from the consent agenda?
Move approval. Second.
We have a motion and second to approve the consent agenda. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. We will move into the action items.
Bid award for traffic paint and beads with Darren Fishel, Road and Bridge Administrator.
Good morning, Derek.
Good morning, Commissioners. This request for action is to discuss and take appropriate action on a Saline County Road and Bridge Department request to award the bid for waterborne latex traffic line paint and reflective glass traffic beads. Sealed bids were opened on February 18th, 2025 at 11 a.m. 5 bids were received for the paint and 5 bids were received for the glass traffic beads. The attached bid tabulation has the details of all bids. Saline County has 175 miles of asphalt surface road. The bid includes 2,750 gallons of yellow paint, which will repaint the center line on all our roads. The bid also included 6,250 gallons of white paint. This volume will cover approximately 75% of the roads. Alternatives for action is 1, accept the bid as indicated in the staff recommendation. 2, reject the bids. Staff recommends for the yellow and white traffic paint, staff recommends accepting the low bid from Diamond Vogel for $11.34 a gallon. On the yellow paint, $11.34 a gallon on the white paint. For the reflective glass traffic beads, staff recommends accepting the low bid from Jonas Enterprises Incorporated for 42 cents a pound on the glass beads. The combined materials will have a total expense of $132,300. The budget impact is staff recommends that the funds to purchase for the traffic paint and glass beads, $132,300, be taken from the budget account 011-030 912273 paint and beads. This budgeted line item has a current balance of $145,000.
Okay, just a quick question. I know a lot of times after you guys have a crack and seal and you chip and seal, and sometimes you go back and repaint it a second time. Does this here still count for some of that?
It
Do you
does
have
a-
enough to do that?
It does.
Okay.
It does. We've actually lately with the new chip seal material that we've been using for a couple of years, we haven't had the need to do that. So we just keep painting until we run out of paint.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Is this a yearly deal we do? I mean, every year we buy this amount of paint and beads, or is it?
Yes, this is a yearly maintenance activity.
So we actually repaint the yellow lines and the white lines on all the roads yearly?
All of the yellow every year and about 75% of the white every year.
Is it getting to the point where, I mean, it needs it? I mean, is it?
It is. It's a safety issue, in the winter. Some of our roads are narrow, and a lot of people at night, that's how they guide themselves in their vehicle, is off that white and yellow line.
Okay.
Any other comments or questions? Hearing none, I'll bring it back to any from the public. Any comments? I'll bring it back to the commission for discussion or possible action.
Go ahead.
I'd move that we approve RFA 2025-35 as presented.
Second the motion.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
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 All opposed, same sign. Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next item.
Kansas Hazardous Mitigation Grant with Michelle Weiss, Emergency Management Director.
Good morning.
Good morning, Commission. I am here on behalf of Rural Fire District 6. They are requesting permission to apply and accept the award for the hazard mitigation grant. They're looking to put a generator in at their station for RFD 6. Essentially, this was something that has been identified in our hazard mitigation plan for the last 2 revisions. It's something that continues to be a need. We applied for this grant. We were asked to take the next step, which is a formal application, which is why I'm here before you now. This grant is a 25% match, so the district's total project will be $25,323.86. The state and the federal portion will cover the $19,742.90, which will be the installation of the generator and the electrical updates for the fire station to accept the generator. And then we as in District 6 will be on the hook for that 25%, which is $6,580.96. They're just going to purchase a generator, and that will cover their match for this project. And then their funds are coming out of their special equipment funds. Are there any questions?
Are we trying to get this for all the fire stations around to make sure we got generators in all of the fire stations?
So some of the districts took advantage of the ARPA grant that you guys had opened up to them, and some of them did install generators through that. That was not a project that District 6 looked at doing, so they're looking at doing it this way. I do know that some of them have expressed the desire to do that just so that their equipment is obviously operational during power outages. Even as far as some districts saying that they would open up as a shelter out in the county if it was needed during an incident.
Thank you.
Any other comments by the commission? Questions? Anyone from the public? Any questions, comments? Hearing none, I'll bring it back to the commission for discussion or possible action.
Mr. Chairman, I move we approve RFA 2025-38 as presented.
I'll second it.
We have a motion and a second to approve RFA 2025-38 as presented. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign. Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next item?
Commission districts with Philip Smith Haynes, County Administrator.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the commission.
Morning.
So federal law generally requires that elected officials who are elected from districts adhere to a one-person, one-vote standard. And Kansas state law further requires that county commission districts in particular, county commissioners be elected from districts that are as compact and equal in population as possible. Generally, what that means is that the commission districts need to vary in size by no more than 10% from each other. Typically, we review, as does the state and the feds and everyone, our districts every 10 years after the federal census. And so we did that last in 2022 when those census numbers were available, and we made some modifications to the districts, as you are all aware. However, state law actually provides for commission districts to be reviewed every 3 years. Well, 2022 plus 3 is now. So staff has looked at the districts. We don't have, the problem with reviewing it every 3 years is that we don't have the precinct level population data. The state only has data at the level of cities and townships. So our GIS staff looked at the state population projections, sort of applied those to the 5 districts, also looked at building permits as another proxy for how population might have changed since 2022, and came to the conclusion, looking at it both different ways, that the districts appear to still be within the 10% threshold of each other, and so there is no recommendation for change at this time. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I don't have any. Any comments or questions by the public?
One question, Phil. When is the census, the next census, 32?
2030, April 1st of 2030.
Okay. Will we need to look at this again in 3 years, though?
Yeah, we'll look at it in 2028, even though we won't have new numbers. And then we'll look at it again probably in 2032.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Any questions or comments by the public? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the commission for discussion or possible action.
Mr. Chairman, make a motion we approve RFA 2025-33 as presented.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve RFA 2025-33 as presented. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Move into the information items.
Financial projections.
Good morning again. So this is the second step in our annual budget process as we start mentally preparing ourselves for adopting a budget for 2026. We've done this for the last 4 or 5 years now, where we look at sort of, if we do nothing, what happens to the budgets, particularly the 7 tax-supported funds. And if you look out 5 years, those numbers get scary, but the whole point of this exercise is to keep those numbers from getting scary, to recognize that there are adjustments that we will need to make. And if you looked at the projection for 2026, each of the 7 funds goes negative, I would say slightly negative in proportion to current balances. That is, again, if we do nothing. So there are always options that are available to the commissioners as we go through the budget process. And the point here is that you'll need to avail yourself of some of those options, either on the revenue side, which means adjusting property tax in some fashion, or on the expenditure side, which means constraining spending increases. So currently, very preliminary numbers, real estate only numbers from the appraiser's office, potential valuation growth of about 3.5%. So, capturing some of that is one option on the revenue side. On the expenditure side, of course, the biggest expenditure is the cost of having employees, and so we have just kicked off the annual conversation with employees about salary and benefits. So that conversation will be ongoing for the next several months. There are other categories of expenditure that are large and can potentially be used to adjust some things one way or the other, such as in the Road and Bridge Fund, their capital outlay, which generally means purchases of equipment. This year, we very specifically requested that Darren not budget for that and that he draw down the balances in his special equipment fund. We could look at doing that again, depending on the balance of that fund. There is, of course, a point at which you can no longer do that, so need to take that into account. Another large expenditure in Road and Bridge, of course, is their annual construction budget. This year, we did not increase that. So as a consequence of inflation, they're able to do a fewer miles of construction this year than they have in the last few years. So again, that's an option. On the employee benefits side, the biggest cost driver there is health insurance. Again, we're looking at a very, very preliminary number, but slightly under 5% there is what our consultants are telling us. That is if current trends continue and if we make no changes to the plan. It's always an option to make changes to the plan, have the county contribute less and the employees contribute more. So again, there are a number of options. When we get into the special road and special bridge construction funds, those are highly driven by the conversation that we will be having next Tuesday out at Road and Bridge about our plans for improving roads and bridges over the next several years. So that's an overview of the choices that we're facing this year as we go into the budget process. One of these days I'd love to come sit down with you and say, oh yeah, you don't have to make any changes, everything's fine. But that's not the way the world works. I've never in 25 years seen a financial forecast that had that picture in it, because the reality of local government, much like the reality of our budgets at home, is that the wants and needs always tend to grow faster than available resources. So there you have it, and I'd be happy to answer questions.
So Phil, does it look like with projection that, like I said, we're just getting into this and everything, does it look like we're going to have to do anything with the R&R this year? I mean, are we going to have to increase?
So this scenario, of course, is based on not exceeding the R&R, and that drives everything into the negative if expenses increase according to the projections. So in order to not do R&R, there's a scenario under which you could not do R&R. That involves constraining the expenditure side. That's always an option. Now, I will say the legislature is currently debating a bill that would do away with R&R in favor of a different system that would allow for an inflationary increase. As you know, the revenue neutral rate means the exact same dollar amount as the previous year, not the same tax rate. So that means that we're expected to eat the cost of goods and services going up every year, and that obviously has a limited ability to do that. So yes, I mean, it is possible to keep our tax revenues where they are now. That would involve cutting on the expenditure side, and that, of course, involves a discussion of what people are willing to live without.
Okay, thank you.
Where are we in year-wise on our agreement with the city on what we'll do to the Expo Center properties?
This is the 5th year. The 2025 is the 5th year, and so we will have completed the city's list by the end of this year. And then, as we discussed during your strategic planning meeting last fall, then the intent is then staff will bring you back and plan for what else needs to be done beyond the city's list, and you can choose whether or not to fund that. We did, while you were out last week, we did discuss intending to do a special meeting out at Expo the first week of April to have further discussion about some Expo-related topics. So that is definitely a piece of the conversation as we go into the budget.
Okay. Any other comments, questions?
Thank you.
Next information item.
Commissioners' comments?
We attended the State House visit here the other day, last Thursday. Was Thursday, wasn't it? Okay, yeah, last Thursday. It was a great visit. I'll tell you what, it's some of those you go to, you just like, okay, big deal. But they did have a really good program this time on the highway patrol and about their wants and needs for the area. And I thought it was very, very informational, and was really glad that we got a chance to hear that. Got a chance to visit with a couple of representatives. They were in and out pretty fast during the lunchtime, but it was a good trip.
I attended a special meeting of the Airport Authority, and it dealt mainly with a couple bond issues for improvements and projects that they have going on there. I also, along with the chair, took a tour of the Memorial Hall with a city representative, just getting eyes on the bones of the structure and the looks of it. So that was a very interesting tour.
Any other comments? Okay.
Announcements?
I will make one announcement, which is, as I mentioned earlier, next Tuesday is a study session out at Road and Bridge at 9 o'clock. So we will be doing that next Tuesday. We will be back in this room 2 weeks from today.
Okay. Thank you. Next.
Discussion of local preference, purchasing preference.
So we had some bid awards earlier in the year that generated a conversation about our commitment to purchasing things from local vendors. And we do, of course, currently have a local purchase preference in our purchasing policy. That is that if a local vendor's bid is within 1% of the low bid, we contact them and give them an opportunity to match the lower bid. The discussion earlier this year was that a local vendor was not within 1%, but felt that it was not a wise decision to go to an out-of-town vendor. And the majority of the commission at that time agreed with that and decided to stick with the local vendor. Generated this conversation about should we look at that percentage, adjust it in some way to avoid situations like that in the future. So I just did a survey of other cities and counties and, what folks have. And I will say 1% is not the norm. Many folks are at 5%, 7%, a couple at 10%. They also, there's this differentiation between folks who automatically award to the local bidder if it's within a certain percentage versus those who do what we do, which is give the local vendor an opportunity to match. So there's a split on that. Folks do that both different ways. I also posed the question, how did you arrive at your percentage? And for most people, that's sort of lost to history. It's been that way, and they can't remember how they came to their percentage. But for the few that have changed it in recent memory, it's been something like this, where they surveyed other people and said, oh, well, that sounds like a good number. So this is just a discussion of this issue today, and no action requested from the commission, but be happy to answer any questions, take commission feedback. You all discuss amongst yourselves whether you want staff to do anything with this or not.
Well, I've struggled with this for 18 years at the city level and the county level, and I don't necessarily have the right answer. So this is not easy. It's not easy for staff. It's not easy for the commission. But I really struggle when somebody from out of state that we have never gotten anything from has the lowest bid. That makes no sense to me. And I don't know how you write that in there. When somebody from Mississippi comes in and we've never bought a vehicle from them, and they're competing with us around here, that's a no-brainer for me. So how do you write stuff like that in there? I don't know. But that's just where I struggle.
I'm new to this, so this is all interesting. And I have a couple comments. I, of course, want to support local as most everybody would, I'm sure, local businesses. On the other side, I'm wondering, have we in the last 5-7 years had complaints or written up documents that they went against this 1% or were those kind of things?
Yes.
Okay.
I would say
Okay.
the recent incident of was sort of the one example of that, but it happens occasionally. I mean, maybe once a year you get someone who says, it's not fair. But yeah, it's not a constant drumbeat of complaints, I would say.
I think 1%, 1% is just way, way too low. I mean, and I think 10% is way too high. You get some of this equipment we got out there when you're buying a heavy piece of equipment for road and bridge, and 10%, that's a good chunk of money. I would like to see us, would like to see the 1% changed. If you look at this whole list that you got here, I mean, I think we should be in that 5 to 7% range, or at least a 5% range for that. I think we should buy local as much as possible. And I think the rest of the commission probably agrees with that, as long as it's within the guidelines of what we decide to pick.
And here's the other side, and this is why I struggle. I get with you, but you get too high, nobody else bids. There's nobody from Kansas City, there's nobody from Wichita, there's nobody from Manhattan bidding. If it's 10%, they're just not going to beat
That's
it.
what
Because
I said. I think 10% is too high.
Well, so what is that? Is it 5 that's good? Because you do need a competitive bidding process, because we're not only supporting local businesses, we have to support the local taxpayers who are actually paying for this. And if this in the end, when nobody bids from other counties, if nobody bids, the price goes up and the taxpayers pay more. That's why I struggle. I'm saying I don't have the right answer, but you've got to be really careful about that, because if you're at an automobile dealership from Manhattan and it gets up there too high, they're just not even bidding.
I probably was the one that was more perplexed by what went down. And when we make a policy, I feel like it's a policy we need to follow, or why have the policy?
Right.
And we have the option of not having, just having the disclaimer at the bottom that at the commission's discretion, they will accept whatever bid they want. Then you don't tie yourself into a 1, a 5, a 10. The problem I have with 5% is the issue with the out-of-state versus the local. That was still over 5%. So 5.2, what do you do? With 2% or 0.2% over what your guidelines say, you set yourself up for a possible litigation. But I don't have a problem of whatever the policy is. Just follow it. That's all I ask, and that way the bidders know, and the taxpayers know. And I agree with the fact that we have to protect the taxpayers also. It's important. So there, if you go 5%, you ought to set up a dollar amount. That'd be good for $75,000 purchases. Anything over that would be 2%. And once it gets up to 150 or bigger, it's 1%, because you can't be giving 10% out when you're building a jail. So it sounds like a lot of rules, a lot of paperwork. I don't care which way we go. I love buying local. I understand the theory, the payback to the public, and I support it, but I also support following the policy.
Quick question, are we talking just vehicles and equipment, or are we talking anything? Because you just brought up the jail, and I was thinking, oh boy.
Yeah.
The policy as currently written is not specific to a type of purchase. It's for anything that's competitively bid. There is at least one example, I believe it's from Reno County or the city of Hutch, that is similar to what Commissioner Weiss said, which is it's a certain percentage up to a certain dollar amount and then a lower percentage above that.
Gotcha. Did you see anything in your comparisons that talked about out-of-state vehicle purchases? Nothing. Because again, that one didn't make any sense to me.
Well, and I just want to comment, it's like, being a business owner, I've fought this for years. Yeah, where selling a product and you're authorized to sell this product, but there was companies out there from North Carolina, from wherever, Virginia, that dealt specifically with the federal government, that had purchasing powers that somebody here in Saline, Kansas just didn't have. So they was able to procure and purchase at a level. And it's the same way now with vehicles. I know with the sheriff and some of these other people that are buying vehicles on this, they're available on the state or federal level that has this group that buys vehicles. So it's really one of those things where it's like, I think sometimes it's really hard if it's just not for a vehicle, there is companies out there that buy on the government deals that's available to sell on that it's hard to compete with.
The thing that also concerns me is after that purchase from the out of state, the truck, which I believe we had bought from that dealer before, but the next week we had I think sheriff's vehicle or some vehicles came to us for bid awards, and we gave it to a non-local, and the bid was only 2% higher than the local bid, and there's no continuity there. I struggle with why do we do that? If it was right the week before, what happened in that week that changed our minds, that made us do that?
And I'm not justifying it, but there was a person here at the first one, and there was not a person here on the second one.
Exactly.
And I'm not justifying that.
Right.
But that's what happened, I feel like.
I believe so too. So, yeah.
The squeaky wheel, I guess, you know.
Well, I'm a policy follower, so I agree when Commissioner Weiss mentions if we're going to have a policy, we should follow it. And I did just look at Reno's, and it makes sense, but it is a little bit more cumbersome, but that does make sense.
Did any of the counties have no policy? Mm-hmm. And kind of have Commissioner Weiss's point about a disclaimer at the end? I mean, actually, I've never thought of that, and it kind of makes kind of sense. But I didn't know whether that was even what other people had done. Goddard?
I believe it's Butler County that has no local purchase preference. There was at least one. I didn't ask about a disclaimer. We do generally have a sort of blanket statement in our RFPs in particular. I'm not sure about the bids that says, we commission reserves the right to, award to whoever they want. That is there, generally speaking, for sort of unusual circumstances that we may not be anticipating at the time we go out to seek proposals. I think if you made a regular habit of that, you would do some reputational damage. Like, I'm not going to bid with Saline County because I don't know if they're going to choose us. And so I think there's a risk associated with that. I'm not sure how strong that risk is, but.
The other thing about bidding, and I know Commissioner Vidrickson used to bring this up every once in a while, is a lot of times it's not apples to apples. And so you can't necessarily take the lowest bid. I mean, different vehicles, they might have met the specs, but they're still not apples to apples. How do we do that? How do we justify that? Do we have to take the lowest bid?
There are some circumstances under which you're constrained by state law. Those are generally construction type activities. For vehicles, you generally do not have to take the lowest bid.
Okay.
And for, paper, pens, whatever else you might be buying, you generally do not have to take the lowest bid. That is a policy that the commission has set, and B, the rationale for that policy, as you've all discussed, is the more higher bids you take, the worse the taxpayers have, the more they have to fund, right? So, there are reasons for taking the lowest bid, but they're not typically mandates that you have to follow. And I'm sorry, I think there was another part of that question that I.
That's all good.
Okay.
Well, I know you're probably looking for direction here, so you can bring us back something. I guess I'll start off with I think the 1% probably is too low. Something closer to Reno's. I don't like to know what everybody else thinks.
I agree. Never thought about it until today, or till I was looking at this, but looking at the surveyed and the work put in and where we are with 1% compared to everybody else, I would say it's too low. And I am interested in something similar to Reno County that Commissioner Weiss mentioned, and or Commissioner Shadwick has mentioned, but I like that percentage based on a certain amount, then a little different on a different amount.
So I don't know what that amount is, but
Yeah,
that
don't
kind of makes
either.
sense to me.
Yeah, yeah.
Jim, what do you think about the out-of-state thing? I mean, I don't
The
have an
argument
answer.
is it keeps, we bought out of state, and some of it was out of necessity, because that's the only bids we were getting there during COVID.
Sold, yeah.
And so I'd love to buy local. I just, when we put a percent or something in the policy, I tell you right now, I can see it going, if you put it at 5, someone's going to come in at 5.1%.
No doubt.
And they're going to be at the podium wanting to visit with us about why $38 is costing him the sale of a $50,000 vehicle.
I know.
So it's going to happen again. I like Reno's way of doing it. We talked about that, a few of us, 7 years ago, when we about doing something like that. And why we took 1% was because something like the jail. Mm-hmm. But we didn't factor in. I like the step process, different percentages at different amounts. But I tell you now, once it's a policy and it comes for a vote,
I know.
I'll be voting policy.
Okay.
I will too. I think that's the proper way to do it.
Yes, and I agree. Right now, if we sat there and said today that down the road, if this is going to be our policy, this is the policy, Mr. Joe Blow, if you're going to bid it, up front that we're following policy.
Now, to answer Commissioner Shadwick's question about apples and apples, we rely heavily upon our department heads to bring in competitive bids that are like items, and to write their specs.
That's the critical part, is the specs.
To write their specs,
Does it meet
and to make
specs?
the recommendation that this does not meet, And we can rely heavily upon that department head if he says this doesn't meet our interpretation of what the specs are or whatever.
All right, fair enough.
And do we need to differentiate between, vehicle purchases and, I mean, you said the jail, so do we need to?
I think the dollar amounts. The
Okay,
dollar
yeah,
amount.
well,
What do you think? The dollar amount kind of
The
makes
dollar
sense?
amount, I think, is the one that makes sense, once you get up
yeah.
over that $10,000 mark or
$1 million
$1 million mark or whatever it is,
Yeah,
then
yeah.
on there, I mean,
I think that alleviates that concern for you, yeah.
Because I remember that, on that, it wasn't apples to apples on that one bid that we had on that one from out of state either. I mean, you know, it was a 25 versus a 24.
Correct.
But you are right, and I can go along and agree with that. I mean, if we've got a policy out there, you're right, we should follow that policy.
Does that give you any direction?
Well, thanks for your work.
Well, we did this at least.
Yes.
Okay.
So what I'm hearing is, I think I've got 3 folks who are interested in revisiting this with a higher percentage and a tiered percentage based on some dollar amount, and all of that to be determined, and probably at the next time we look at the policy, not next couple weeks.
Oh, no doubt.
Yeah.
And you can look at trends over the last so many years and see where that tiered rate might fall best based on expenditures over the last 5, 7 years, whatever. I mean, I'm just trying to help you from my little end right here. So that's what I would suggest. But thank you.
Sounds good. Any other comments?
Move we adjourn.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to adjourn. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. We are adjourned.